Galactic Empire kidnapped her twins. They had no idea their mother was humanity's deadliest general. The morning on Vareth IV smelled like red soil and rain that had not come yet. The kind of dry, heavy air that made the crops lean sideways, as if listening for something far away. Myra Voss was already in the field before the twin sons came up. She moved between the rows of grain with a short blade in her hand, cutting away the dead stalks from the healthy ones without looking down at her feet. She never looked down at her feet. Her eyes moved in slow sweeps across the field the way a person watches a horizon they do not trust. She was not a tall woman, medium height lean, with dark brown skin turned darker by years of open sun, and there was nothing about the way she looked that would make a stranger stop and stare. She wore plain gray work clothes and boots that had been repaired 3 times. Her hair was tied back with a piece of wire she had found near the irrigation ditch. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet woman at the edge of town, who grew more grain per acre than anyone else on Vareth IV and never talked about herself. They liked her well enough. She helped when help was needed. She never caused trouble. She paid what she owed, but there was something about her eyes that made people choose their words carefully when she was in the room, not because she was unkind. She was never unkind, but because her eyes were always doing something. Always measuring, always nodding, always aware. People assumed she had lived a hard life somewhere before Vareth IV and had come here to forget it. They were not wrong. She finished the row she was working and stood straight and looked back at the farmhouse, a low, wide building of pale stone she had built herself over one long summer. She could see the light on in the kitchen, and she could hear, just faintly, the sound of arguing. She almost smiled. Eli and Sira were awake. The twins were 10 years old and had their mother's eyes dark, sharp, always watching, but everything else about them was their own. Eli was louder, faster to laugh, quicker to cry, the kind of child who made friends in under a minute and forgot to eat when something interested him. Sira was quieter and more careful, and had a habit of watching a situation from the edge before she decided to walk into it. They argued about everything and agreed about everything that mattered, the way twins sometimes do. When Mara came inside, they were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, with a torn piece of flatbread between them, and very strong opinions about who had eaten more of it. "She started it," Eli said. "I did not," Sira said. "Both of you are wrong," Myra said, and set the bread on the counter where neither of them could reach it without getting up, and poured herself a cup of water and sat down. They ate breakfast with the door open and the cool morning air coming in. Mara listened to Eli talk about the pond he wanted to visit after lessons, and Sira describe a dream she had about a silver ship the size of a city. Mara listened to both of them with full attention the way she always did, not the distracted half-listening of a tired parent but actual, complete attention, every word. And when they spoke she looked at them the way she had once looked at maps of enemy positions, learning. Storing understanding. She loved them in a way she had no words for, not because she was not a person who had words. She had many words and she chose them carefully. But because what she felt when she looked at Eli and Sira existed somewhere below language, in a part of her that had survived things she never talked about and come out still able to feel this, which she considered the most remarkable thing that had ever happened to her. After breakfast, she walked them to the small school building 2 kilometers down the road and came back and worked until midday. Then she stopped and stood very still in the middle of the field. There were vehicles on the main road, large, flat-bottomed troop carriers with the blue and gold markings of the Solvin Concordat. 3 of them moving slowly through the colony like something that owned the ground it moved on. Mara had seen those markings before, a long time ago, in a different life, through the targeting display of a warship she was flying in the wrong direction toward a Solvin fleet. But that was not information she shared with anyone on Vareth IV. She watched the vehicles until they turned toward the center of town, and then she went back to work, but her hands were slower now, and her eyes did not leave the direction the vehicles had gone. She had read the notices the Concordat had been posting in the Colony Common, new directives from the Solvent Imperial Commission about non-citizen documentation and resource assessment and productivity standards. The language of those notices was the polished, clean language of bureaucracy, but she had spent years learning to read what was underneath clean language. And what was underneath those notices was appetite. The quiet, organized appetite of an empire that had decided a thing was useful to it. She finished the row and went inside and cleaned her blade and put it away. It was late afternoon when she walked back toward the school. She was still 300 meters away when she saw that there were no children outside. The yard was empty in the way a yard is empty when something has cleared it quickly rather than naturally. She started walking faster. She passed the baker's wife, who was standing at her door with both hands pressed over her mouth. She passed old Henris, who kept his sheep in the field beside the road, and he looked up at her with the expression of a man who had just watched something terrible and did not know how to begin saying so. She did not stop to ask, she was running now. The school door was open, inside. 2 teachers sat at their desks with the rigid, trying not to show terror stillness of people who had been told to stay seated. There were overturned chairs near the window. There were small footprints in the dust near the back door, and the room was otherwise empty. Her daughter's green scarf was on the floor near the window. Mara picked it up. One of the teachers, young woman, voice like she was holding it together with both hands, said, "They came with documents, the Imperial Youth Integration Directive. They said all non-citizen children under 12. They said it was legal, they had the stamps." "Which facility?" Mara said. The teacher blinked. We were told Station Vorath, but that is deep in Solvent space. You cannot, they had soldiers. There were 12 of them." "Which direction did they leave?" Mara said. The teacher pointed. Mara set the green scarf carefully in her pocket. She walked back to her house. She did not run, she walked at the same pace she always walked, steady and even, and her face was the same face she always wore, calm, open, unremarkable. Inside, she went to the back room, the one with the locked box under the floorboard that she had not opened in 7 years. She opened it. Inside was a set of old identification tags, military grade, UEEC issue, a folded personal communicator with a frequency she had not used since she left, and a single data chip that held the contact information of people she had once commanded and who had told her when she left that if she ever needed anything, anything at all, she should use the chip and they would come. She had told them she would never use it. She picked up the chip. She sat on the edge of the bed for 1 minute, exactly 1 minute, and in that minute she allowed herself to feel everything, the fear for Eli and Sierra, the white heat under her ribs, the image of Sierra's scarf on the floor. She felt all of it fully and completely, and then she put it away in the place where she kept things that could not be allowed to make decisions for her. Then she stood up. She packed a bag, small, plain, practical. She put on her old boots, the ones she had not worn since Vereth because they were built for hard ground and harder situations. She put the chip in her pocket next to the green scarf. Her neighbors would later say they had seen her walking toward the transport dock at the edge of the colony just before dark, calm, unhurried, a small bag over one shoulder, and they had assumed she was going into town for supplies. Not a single one of them had any idea what had just been set in motion. The transport that carried Mara off Vereth IV was a cargo hauler going to the junction station at Orel 9. She paid in raw grain credits, which nobody traced, and sat in the back among crates of dried protein blocks and said nothing to the 2 other passengers who shared the hold with her. She sat with her hands in her lap and her back against the wall and her eyes half closed. Anyone watching would have thought she was sleeping. She was not sleeping. She was running numbers. She knew Station Vorath by reputation. Every military strategist who had operated near Solvent space knew it. It was an Imperial processing hub built into the shell of a captured asteroid, heavily armored, sitting in a tight orbit around the gas giant Yaskerath. It had 3 rings of defense drones, a garrison of around 400 soldiers, and enough firepower to stop a mid-class warship. It was not designed to stop one person. She filed that thought and moved on to the next calculation. 19 days. That was what the teacher had said before Mara stopped listening to the parts she did not need. 19 days before the children would be transferred from Vorath to the Imperial Core for what the Concordat called re-education, and what Mara called the permanent erasure of everything her children were. She had 24 hours to reach Orel 9, and then she needed a ship, and then she needed information, and then she needed to be inside Solvin space before the window closed. She had done harder things on less time. Not many, but some. Orel 9 was the kind of place that existed in the gaps between proper civilization. It was not quite a city and not quite a station, just a collection of pressurized structures bolted together over 3 generations by people who needed a place to do business that nobody official would look at too carefully. It smelled like recycled air and fried food, and something chemical that Mara identified as a coolant leak somewhere near Junction 4. She noted the junction and the direction and moved on. She found the person she was looking for in less than 2 hours. His name was Kale, and he was a thin human man in his 50s who ran a communications relay business that was mostly legitimate and partly not, and who had, 12 years ago, passed information to a UEEC intelligence unit that had saved 40 soldiers from a Solvin ambush. He did not know those soldiers had been saved because of him. Mara had never told him, but she had kept his name and his location on the chip all the same. She sat down across from him in his small, cluttered office and said his name and watched him go still the way prey animals go still. "I need a ship," she said. "Fast enough to reach Solvin space in under 8 days and small enough that it does not show up as a threat signature on Imperial long-range scans. I also need a Solvin Imperial access code for the Vorath sector, a current roster of Vorath's garrison rotation, and the frequency ID of their internal communications array." Kale stared at her. Who are you?" he said. "You passed a message to a UEAC unit 12 years ago from a source at Orel 9, she said. "You were the source. You had a brother in that unit. His name was Pell. He is alive because of what you did. I know because I was the commander of that unit and I kept the debt." Kale was very quiet for a moment. "You're UEAC, he said. "I was," she said. "What rank?" he said. She looked at him. Something in the way she looked at him made the question feel like a thing he probably should not have asked. "I can get you most of what you're asking," he said. "But the access codes, that's not something I keep. You'd need a proper broker for that, someone deep in the information trade." "Where?" she said. He told her about a station called Eric Das. Eric Das was 2 days from Orel 9 on the ship Kale arranged for her. A small, flat courier vessel called the Pale Run that was fast and dull-looking, and had a sensor profile roughly equivalent to a very large piece of debris. The pilot was a quiet, threnny woman named Yava who had 3 sets of eyes, and the habit of watching all directions at once, and who told Mara within the first hour that she hated the Solvin Empire personally and professionally. "They conscripted my ship 2 years ago," Yava said. "Held it for 6 months. When I got it back, they had installed monitoring hardware in the walls. I found 14 separate listening nodes, 14, in a ship this size." "Did you remove them?" Mara said. "I reprogrammed them," Yava said. "Now they send the Empire a continuous audio feed of a market stall on Drevath selling fish." Mara looked at her for a moment. "Can you hack an Imperial internal communications array?" Mara said. Yava's middle set of eyes shifted. That was apparently what a Threnny did when they were interested. Depends on the installation. "Station Vorath." Yava was quiet for a long moment. "That is not a small ask," she said. "No," Mara said. It is not, I need it done from the inside, close approach, within 100,000 kilometers of the station. Can you do it? If I can get within range and have enough time, Yava said. Yes, I think yes. What is on Voreth that you want this badly? My children, Mara said. Yava did not ask any more questions about the mission. She did ask later, while they were eating in the small galley, whether Mara had a plan for getting off Voreth after whatever she was planning to do on Voreth. Yes, Mara said. Can I hear it? Yava said. Not yet, Mara said. I am still building it. Erekdas was massive and dark and loud. A station built for commerce that nobody wanted to put their name on. It had 6 levels of market and 100 languages moving through the air at once, and the kind of crowd density where anything could happen, and usually did. The information broker she was looking for was named Drek Ossian, a Solvan male, which was unusual for a broker operating in fringe space, since Solvans were imperial citizens, and most of them did not bother with places like this. But Drek was the kind of Solvan who had decided early that there was more profit in selling the Empire's secrets than in serving it. He was large and pale-scaled with the 4 long arms of his species, and he sat behind a desk in a back room of a place that called itself a currency exchange, and he received Mara with the bored contempt he gave everyone. Human, he said, looking at her the way someone looks at something they have already decided is a waste of their time. What do you want? Voreth Station, she said. Internal layout updated within the last 6 months. Current troop rotation, holding facility locations, and an active Imperial transit code for the Yaskarath sector. Drek laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. That information costs more than a human colony farmer could pay in a lifetime. How did you even get into this room? I told your door guard the right words, she said. What words? He said. I said I was here about the Kellen corridor, she said. Drek stopped. The bored look was gone. In its place was something more careful. The Kellen corridor was not a subject people brought up casually in rooms like this. The Battle of the Kellen corridor was the most studied military engagement in the last 50 years of Solvan-human conflict. A moment when a single human commander had taken a force of 11 ships against a Solvan fleet of 340, and had not just survived, but had turned the Solvans around. Redirected their own formations against each other using false beacon signals and timed communication blackouts, and walked away with 9 ships still flying, and a path open through the most heavily defended sector in the region. The Solvan High Command had spent years trying to identify the human commander responsible. They had never found a name. Drek's eyes moved over Mara with very different attention now, slower, more careful. That was a UEEC black operation, he said carefully. The commander was never identified. No, Mara said, they were not. The room was very quiet. Drek leaned forward slowly. Are you telling me that you? I am telling you, Mara said, that I need Voreth Station data and an Imperial transit code, and I am telling you that I have just told you something worth considerably more than that data. So we are even, and you are going to give me what I asked for. Drek was still for a long time. Then he turned to his system and started pulling files. 2 hours later, Mara was back on the Pale Run with a data chip containing everything she had asked for, and one additional piece of information Drek had included without being asked. A note that said the children from Vareth IV were listed on Voreth's manifest under Holding Block 7, Sublevel 3, and that they were, as of 3 days ago, unharmed. She sat with that information for a moment. Then she forwarded the Voreth data to Yava and pulled out the contact chip from her bag and activated it for the first time in 7 years. The response came in under 4 minutes. The message said only, "Where and when we are already moving." She typed back coordinates in a time window. Then she put the chip away and looked at the data on the Voreth layout and began to build the rest of her plan, quiet, steady, methodical, The way she built everything piece by piece. Nothing wasted, nothing left to chance. Outside the viewport, the stars were moving fast. She was going to get her children back. Everything else was just mathematics. The moon Krath 9 had no atmosphere worth breathing and no population worth mentioning. It was a gray, airless rock orbiting a dead planet in a system that appeared on navigation charts as a warning rather than a destination. And it was exactly the kind of place where the United Earth Expeditionary Command had chosen, 30 years ago, to bury a depot full of things it did not want anyone to find. Mara had the coordinates from memory. She had never written them down. She had never needed to. There were approximately 412 specific locations she could recall with full precision from her years of service, and Krath 9 was among the most important. The pale run set down on a flat shelf of rock near a depression that looked like nothing at all, until Mara walked to a specific point 12 meters from the landing strut and pressed a sequence into a panel that appeared when she pressed the right piece of rock in the right way. The ground opened, and stairs went down into the dark. Yava watched from the ship with all 3 sets of eyes. "I am choosing not to ask," Yava said over the comm. "Good choice," Mara said and went down. The depot had not been touched since she left it. The air recyclers were still running. The power cells were at 60%, which was better than she had expected, and the equipment was sealed in climate-controlled cases along the walls in the organized, labeled way she had always kept her things. She moved through the space without hurrying. She took a small case of communications gear, a personal shield unit that was old but functional, a set of tactical earpieces, and from a separate locked compartment, a UEEC-issue sidearm that she checked, cleared, loaded, and clipped to her belt without ceremony. In the back of the depot, under a separate cover, was a crate she had not opened in 7 years. Inside was Scratch. Scratch was approximately the size and shape of a large dog, built from salvaged Imperial military drone components, and rebuilt from the inside by Mara over 2 years of quiet work after she left the service. It had 4 articulated legs, a flat sensor array where a head would have been, 2 extendable manipulator arms folded against its body, and an internal processing unit that Mara had spent a very long time teaching to think in ways Imperial drones were never meant to think. She had not named it Scratch because it was built from scratch, though she had named it Scratch because the first thing it had done when she finished building it and activated it was scratch the floor with 1 foot the way a dog does when it wakes up, and she had found that funny in a way she could not entirely explain. She ran the reactivation sequence and waited. Scratch's sensor array lit up, blue first, then white, and it stood up in the crate on its 4 legs and turned its array toward her and made a sound that was somewhere between a mechanical hum and something that resembled recognition. "Long time," Mara said. Scratch scratched the floor once. She picked up the crate and carried it to the ship. Corporal Jin was waiting at the rendezvous point, a debris field at the edge of the Solvan border, in a battered long-range shuttle that looked like it had been through at least 1 war, which it had. He was a short, broad man in his 40s with gray at his temples, and the kind of stillness in his body that came from years of training in exactly how much energy to use and how much to save. He had served under Mara for 6 years. He had been with her at Kellen Corridor. He had been with her at Drevath Station and the Myra Belt Campaign, and a classified operation on a Solvan moon that he still could not talk about under any legal framework known to humans. When her message came through on the chip she had given him on the day she retired, he had been at a card game and he had folded his hand, put his credits in his pocket, and started packing before he reached the door. He came aboard the pale run and looked at Mara and said, "You look exactly the same." "You look older," she said. "I am older," he said. "Good," she said. "It means you survived. Sit down, I need to brief you." He sat, then he saw Scratch standing near the cargo wall and stared. "Is that the drone you were always working on?" "Yes," she said. "Does it work?" Better than you, she said. Jin looked at Scratch. Scratch's sensor array rotated toward him slowly. It's looking at me, Jin said. It is deciding whether to trust you, Mara said. And... Scratch made a short sound and looked away. You passed, Mara said. She laid out the plan on the table in the galley, and all three of them, Mara, Yava, Jin, sat around it and looked at the Voreth station schematic while Scratch stood in the corner and processed its own copy through the uplink Yava had set up. The plan was not simple, but it was clean. Mara did not make plans that were not clean. She had a strong preference for operations where every piece had a clear purpose, and where the number of assumptions was as small as possible, because assumptions were where plans died. Yava would take the Pale Run to within 80,000 kilometers of Voreth and begin cycling through the station's communication array frequencies using the access codes Drek had provided. Her job was to take over the internal communication channels and loop the security feeds in the holding blocks, which would give them a window of approximately 40 minutes before the station's security system flagged the anomaly. Jin's job was noise. He would take a separate entry point on the station's freight docking ring and move loud, not killing, but pulling garrison soldiers toward him and away from sub-level 3 where the holding blocks were, giving Mara a corridor of reduced resistance to move through. Scratch would go ahead of Mara into the station through the maintenance tunnels. Its size was exactly right for the tunnel dimensions in the Voreth schematic, a fact that was not an accident because Mara had built Scratch to those dimensions 7 years ago when she had first studied the Voreth layout, and decided that if she ever needed to enter that station, she would want a unit that fit those tunnels. Which told something about how Mara's mind worked, and what it was always quietly preparing for even in the middle of an ordinary life. Mara would move directly to sub-level 3, holding block 7, get her children, and bring them back to the Pale Run through the maintenance exit at the station's outer ring. The whole operation from first breach to exit was planned for 52 minutes. What happens if it takes longer? Jin said. Then we adjust, she said. And if something goes wrong that we haven't planned for? Mara looked at him. Name one thing that has ever gone exactly as planned, she said. Jin thought about it. Nothing, he said. Correct, she said. That is why the plan is built around what we can control, not around what we hope will happen. We control the entry timing. We control the communication disruption. We control the decoy. Everything else we respond to as it comes. That is the plan. Jin nodded slowly. He had heard her brief 100 operations, and she always said something like this at the end. Something that cut through the comfortable story a plan could tell you about how it was all going to work out. She never let anyone believe the plan was a guarantee, and because of that, her people never froze when things went sideways, because she had already told them things were going to go sideways. That was one of the things that made her the best. On the second day of travel toward Yaskareth, Jin found the file. He had not been looking for it. He had been using the ship system to run a check on Voreth's garrison records when a cross-reference brought up a UEEC archive file with Mara's service number on it. The file was not fully unlocked, but there were summary headers visible, and Jin sat and read them for a long time. He had known Mara for years. He had served under her, trusted her with his life more times than he could count. Knew her to be the most capable officer he had ever encountered. But the summary headers laid out the full shape of what he already partly knew, and it was something different to see it written in the flat, official language of a military archive. 14 major engagements, 13 decisive victories. The one loss a deliberate withdrawal that saved 40,000 lives. The Kellen Corridor classified action, the Drevath Station campaign, 6 other operations named only by coordinate reference, the development of the asymmetric cascade doctrine, which was now standard curriculum at the UEEC Officer Academy, youngest general in UEEC history by 11 years, classified separation from service under sealed order. all subsequent records sealed by command authority. At the bottom of the visible summary, in the standard threat assessment field that military files used when evaluating commanders for strategic significance, was a line that read, "Subject represents singular strategic asset. No equivalent profile exists in current human military roster. Assessment of potential adversarial threat if opposition aligned. Maximum." Jin sat back in his chair. He thought about Mara in the galley that morning, cutting bread for her breakfast with the same calm efficiency she applied to everything, listening to Yava describe a navigation calculation, and asking one precise question that immediately solved the problem Yava had been circling for 10 minutes. He thought about the green scarf she kept in her left pocket. Then an Imperial patrol signal lit up on the nav screen, and Jin stood up fast and went to find her. Mara was already at the front console when he got there. Yava was beside her. The patrol was a single Imperial light cruiser running a border check sweep, standard pattern, and it had already sent a hail requesting identification. "They'll want a board for inspection," Yava said. "This ship's covered documents are good but not good enough for a full inspection if they find the gear in the hold or scratch." "I will take the comm," Mara said. She sat down, opened the channel, and spoke, not in the trade language that humans used in border exchanges, but in high solvent, clean and precise, with the formal register of someone who had studied not just the language but the cultural weight behind each phrase. She told the patrol commander that this vessel was operating under a transit authorization for a commercial survey mission in the Yaskareth region, and she gave him the access code from Drek's data package. Then, without pausing, she explained in careful, measured terms that if he chose to board and inspect, he would find the authorization was legitimate. He would delay his sweep by approximately 4 hours. His patrol record would show a time-cost incident requiring explanation to his sector commander. And the survey mission's timeline, which was under contract to a Concordat Resource Commission, she then named by its full official title, would be disrupted, for which the patrol would be administratively responsible. She stopped speaking. The channel was quiet for 11 seconds. "Proceed on your heading," the patrol commander said. The channel closed. Yava made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and disbelief. Jin stood in the doorway of the cockpit and looked at the back of Mara's head. "You just talked a warship into moving," he said. "I gave him a problem he did not want," she said, turning back to the navigation screen. "And a reason to let us go that cost him nothing. He made the logical choice." "What if he hadn't?" Myra was quiet for a moment. "Then we would have had a different conversation," she said. Jin thought about the threat assessment line in her file. Maximum. He was beginning to understand what that meant. Yaskareth was a gas giant the color of old bruises, deep purple and rust brown, with storm systems large enough to swallow small moons running in slow, permanent spirals across its surface. It was the kind of planet that looked like it had been angry for a very long time and intended to remain that way. Station Voreth orbited it at a distance of 40,000 kilometers, close enough that the gravity assisted the station's own systems, and far enough that the radiation bands did not cook its electronics. It was a dark, ugly structure, wide and flat, built for function with no thought given to anything else, like a fist made out of metal and intent. Myra looked at it through the forward viewport for a long moment. Then she went to get ready. She moved through her preparations the way she moved through everything, without rushing, without hesitating. She checked the sidearm, checked the shield unit's charge, clipped the tactical earpiece into place, and ran a comm check with Jin and Yava, confirmed Scratch was fully operational, and had the maintenance tunnel map loaded in its primary navigation array, and then stood in the hold for a moment with her eyes closed. She was not praying. She had no strong feelings about prayer. She was doing something more practical, which was running the first 12 minutes of the operation through her head in complete detail, including the 3 most likely things to go wrong and how she would respond to each one. She did this the way a person might check that a door was locked before leaving the house, a last confirmation that everything inside was where she had put it. Then she opened her eyes. 12 minutes to insertion range, Yava said over the comm. Ready, Mara said. Jin's voice came over the channel, ready. Scratch made its short recognition sound. The pale run moved toward Varath like something that had no particular business there, and was in no particular hurry. The station's outer freight ring had a docking port on its eastern side that was, according to the updated schematic Drek had provided, currently receiving a scheduled supply rotation, which meant the docking control system was managing multiple incoming vessels, and its attention was divided. Yava had already inserted a ghost ping into the station's sensor net that made the pale run appear as an extension of the supply convoy, a trailing vessel carrying secondary cargo, unremarkable. At 82,000 kilometers, Yava began her work on the communications array. She did not speak while she worked. She sat very still with all 3 sets of eyes open, and her hands moving across her console in small, careful movements. And the only sound she made was an occasional very quiet sound that might have been concentration, and might have been something she muttered in Threni that had no translation. At 64,000 kilometers, she said, I am in the first layer, 2 more layers, and I have the internal channels. Time, Mara said. 14 minutes to complete the loop, maybe 12, if the second layer is as poorly secured as the first. It won't be, Mara said, assume 14. At the freight docking port, the approach went clean, the ghost ping held, and the docking system assigned them a bay without a human check. Solvent station administrators trusted their systems, which was generally a good practice, except when someone who understood those systems was using them against you. The ship docked. Jin went first, through the freight bay and into the station's lower corridor ring. He was carrying nothing that looked like a weapon until it needed to, and he moved through the first 2 checkpoints using the transit codes in a manner that was relaxed and slightly confused, the body language of a maintenance contractor who was not entirely sure he was in the right section. He got through the second checkpoint before a guard looked at him too long. Jin smiled at the guard. The guard reached for his comm. Jin moved. He was not interested in injuring the guard any more than was necessary to stop him reaching the comm, and he used exactly the amount of force required for that, and not 1 unit more. The guard went down and Jin moved on, and within 2 minutes he was in the garrison corridor, and within 3 minutes he had found the security camera housing for the East residential block, and done something to it that caused 3 alarms to light up simultaneously on the station's security board. 60 seconds later, 7 garrison soldiers were moving east at a run. The corridor towards sublevel 3 was considerably quieter. Mara and Scratch entered through the maintenance hatch on the outer ring. The hatch opened with the access code and did not resist. Beyond it was a shaft of dark tunnel 2 meters high and wide enough for a person to move quickly through, with pipes running along the walls and a faint vibration from the station's mechanical systems that Mara felt in her feet and her hands as she moved. Scratch led its 4 legs carried it silently, its sensor array sweeping in slow arcs. And whenever it identified something worth nodding, it sent the data to Mara's earpiece in short, precise signals she had taught it to use. 1 pulse for a heat signature ahead, 2 pulses for a branching path, 3 for a threat. In the first 4 minutes, they moved 260 meters without contact. Then Scratch sent 3 pulses. Mara stopped. 2 Solvent soldiers were standing at the intersection ahead, not part of the garrison response to Jin's distraction, just a routine patrol that happened to be standing in the wrong place. They were talking to each other in low voices, not paying attention, the comfortable inattention of guards who did not expect anything to happen. Mara considered her options for 3 seconds. She came around the corner walking at a normal pace and spoke to them in high Solvan before they could finish turning toward her. She identified herself as a Concordat facility inspection officer and told them she needed to access Sublevel 3 for a documentation review and that their corridor needed to be clear for the inspection equipment. She held up the data chip from Drek as if it were an authorization device and said the inspection was under Station Commander Sorvath's direct order. Neither soldier was sure enough that this was wrong to do what would be required to prove it. She watched both of them calculate the cost of challenging a Concordat inspector against the cost of being wrong. They stepped aside. She thanked them briefly and moved on. Scratch came around the corner behind her, and the soldiers stared at it. Inspection equipment, Mara said without looking back. She heard them decide not to argue. Sublevel 3 was 3 levels below the main garrison floor and smelled of recycled air, and the flat, neutral smell of a place that had been built to hold things rather than to house people. The holding block doors were gray, numbered, with small view panels set at eye height for a Solvan, which meant well above eye height for a human, and the corridor was lit with the dim blue emergency lighting that Solvans used in areas they considered low priority. Yava's voice came into her earpiece. "I have the internal feeds looping holding block 7 now. You have approximately 38 minutes before the security system flags the loop. Jin is drawing heavy response. Eastern Garrison is fully committed. You have a clear corridor." "Understood," Mara said. Block 7 was at the end of the corridor. She opened it with the access code. The room inside was large and gray and held 12 children from the Vereth IV colony. They were sitting on benches along the walls, some of them sleeping, some of them awake and frightened, all of them in the same state of careful stillness that children go into when they have been scared for a long time and have learned that being still is safer than being noticed. Sierra saw her first. She stood up from the bench so fast she knocked the child next to her sideways, and she crossed the room and hit Mara at full speed, and Mara caught her and held on and did not let go. Eli was 2 steps behind. He made a sound when he saw her that Mara would remember for the rest of her life, a single short sound that was not quite a word, and was not quite a cry, and was everything he had been holding back for the days since the soldiers came to the school. She held them both. For a moment she was not a general and not a strategist and not the most dangerous thing in several sectors of space. She was a mother in a gray room holding her children, and the plan and the timeline and the 38-minute window existed on the other side of a wall she did not want to walk back through yet. She held them for 20 seconds. Then she stood up. "We are leaving," she said. "You are going to stay between me and Scratch at all times. You are going to do exactly what I say exactly when I say it, and you are going to trust me." "We trust you," Sierra said immediately. Eli wiped his face and nodded. "What about the others?" Mara said. She looked at the other 10 children in the room, who were all watching her with very wide eyes. "We are not leaving without them," Sierra said. "No," Mara said, "we are not." Praetor Sorvath received the alert in his command center 7 minutes before Mara would have preferred he received it. A soldier in Sublevel 3 had missed a check-in, and the system had flagged it, and Sorvath had the intelligence to know that 2 simultaneous anomalies on a station that had been quiet for years was not a coincidence. He pulled the holding block cameras. The feeds showed empty corridors. The loops Yava had inserted were clean. But something in the pattern of the feeds was too clean, too still, the way a camera feed looks when it is showing you a recording rather than a live image. He ordered his remaining garrison to Sublevel 3. Then he had a different idea. He opened a station-wide channel and announced that the 12 children from Vereth IV were now being moved to his command center as a security measure, and that any unauthorized individual on the station should understand that harm to the children would follow from any further interference. He said it in standard human so that it would be understood. He settled back and waited for whoever was down there to make the calculation that brought them to him. Mara heard the announcement through her earpiece while she was moving the 12 children through the maintenance tunnel. She paused for exactly 4 seconds. Then she handed the 12 children to Jin, who had fought his way back from the east corridor and was waiting at the tunnel junction with 3 new cuts on his hands and the expression of someone who had recently been very busy and had opinions about that. She told him to get the children to the ship, to launch when the last child was aboard, and to hold position at 40,000 kilometers until she came out or until 40 minutes had passed. 40 minutes, Jin said, and then you take the children home, she said. Jin looked at her. I am coming back, she said. It was the most direct she had ever been about something like that. He noted it, and then did what he always did, which was decide to trust her completely, and he moved. Mara went to find the command center. Sorvath's command center was at the station's core. Heavy doors, 8 soldiers inside. Sorvath himself behind a desk that was designed to communicate authority and was doing its job. He was 4-armed, broad-shouldered, experienced, and as Mara walked through his door flanked by 2 soldiers who had escorted her from the corridor under the impression that they were the ones in control of the situation, he looked at her with the measuring expression of a man deciding how much of a problem she was going to be. He did not look at Scratch, which was a small error on his part. Sit down, he said in standard human. I will stand, Mara said. She looked around the room, 8 soldiers, blast doors on the main exit, 2 secondary exits she had identified on the schematic, the reactor housing 3 levels below her current position. Scratch was already moving toward a ventilation panel in the wall to her left, in a way that the soldiers had not noticed because they were watching her. You have done a great deal of damage to this station, Sorvath said, for a colony farmer. I am not a colony farmer, Mara said. Then what are you? She told him in clear, simple terms without drama what she had already done. The communications array was disrupted and had been transmitting false data to Imperial Command for the last 20 minutes, meaning no one was coming. The station's internal comms were still looped, meaning he could not coordinate his garrison effectively. His escape pods on decks 4 through 6 had been locked by a remote command Scratch had executed 90 seconds ago. And Scratch was currently sitting on the access housing of his station's reactor core, with instructions that Mara had not shared with anyone in the room. Sorvath was very still. You can resolve this simply, Mara said. Release any remaining children from the Verath IV intake, provide me with clear exit to the freight docking ring, and this station and every person on it continues operating as it was before I arrived. None of your soldiers need to be hurt. You need not be hurt. The station continues to function, and you file whatever report describes the situation in whatever way costs you least. Sorvath looked at her for a long time. He was a praetor of the Solvan Empire. He had commanded this station for 9 years. No one had ever walked into his command center and told him what was going to happen rather than asking him. The anger in his chest was enormous and real. But so was the other thing. She was not threatening him. She was describing the situation. The way a person describes weather or mathematics. This is what exists. This is what the variables produce. This is the result. And there was not a single element of what she had said that he could identify as untrue. He thought about the reactor housing. There are no other children, he said. The 12 from Verath were the only intake this cycle. Good, Mara said. You will stand down your unit on my reactor, he said. When I am on my ship, she said. He released her. Scratch came out of the wall and followed her down the corridor, and Mara walked toward the freight ring at the same pace. She always walked, steady, even unhurried. And behind her the command center was completely silent for a very long time. The Pale Run was holding at 41,000 kilometers from Vorath when Mara came out of the freight docking port. She walked across the connector arm and through the hatch and pulled it shut behind her and sealed it, and then stood in the airlock for a moment with her hand flat against the inner door. She was not injured, a bruise forming on her left forearm where a door frame had caught her in the maintenance tunnel. A small cut at her hairline she had not noticed receiving, nothing that required attention. She pressed the inner door open. The hold of the pale run was loud. 12 children from Vereth IV were sitting or standing in various states of exhausted, noisy relief. Some of them crying, some of them talking too fast, some of them simply sitting with their arms around each other, because there was no more energy left for words. Jin was crouched near the back wall with the expression of a man who had been managing a room full of frightened children for 20 minutes, and had found it considerably more challenging than the garrison soldiers he had fought through to get back here. And Eli and Sierra were standing at the front of the hold watching the inner door with the focused, unblinking attention of two people who had been watching that door for a long time and had decided not to stop until it opened. When it opened and Mara stepped through, Sierra made a sound and moved so fast she was there before Mara's second step, and Eli was directly behind her, and for the second time that night Mara caught them both and held on. This time she did not count the seconds. Jin looked at the ceiling and found something interesting to study there. Yava, watching from the cockpit doorway, reached up and rubbed the center of her face with 2 fingers in a gesture that was, for a Threnny, the equivalent of needing a moment. The pale run left Voreth's sensor range before the first alarms reached full escalation. Yava flew on a course that looked like a freight vector until they cleared the Yaskareth gravity influence, and then she pushed the ship to its full speed and they ran. The children slept on the floor of the hold in a loose pile, wrapped in every spare cloth item the ship carried. Jin had found 3 emergency thermal blankets and distributed them with the grim practicality of someone working with whatever was available. Eli and Sierra slept pressed against Mara on each side, Eli on her right, one hand gripping her sleeve even in sleep, Sierra on her left with her face turned toward her mother the way a plant turns toward a window. Mara did not sleep. She sat with her back against the hold wall and her children on each side of her, and she let the tension of the last 9 days move through her and out. Not all at once, not dramatically, just the slow, steady unwinding of something that had been pulled very tight and was now being allowed to return to its natural shape. She thought about the farm. She thought about the field in the morning and the smell of red soil and the particular way the light came across the grain rows at midday, flat and golden and quiet. She thought about the green scarf in her pocket and put her hand on it for a moment. Scratch was in the corner of the hold, legs folded under its body, sensor array dim it looked, she thought, like a very strange dog sleeping at the foot of a very strange family's bed, and she found the thought warmer than she had expected to. Jin came and sat near her after the children were all fully asleep. He did not say anything for a while, and she did not prompt him. She had always appreciated this about Jin, that he understood the difference between a silence that needed to be filled and a silence that needed to be left alone. After a while he said, "I found your file on the ship's system, the summary headers, not the full record. I was not looking for it. The cross-reference pulled it up." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You knew I found it." "You sat differently at the briefing after that," she said. "Not worse, differently, like someone who has been given a number they are still calibrating." Jin was quiet for a moment. "The assessment line at the bottom," he said. "The threat rating maximum. I have seen that line applied to entire fleets, weapons platforms. I have never seen it applied to a single person." "It was written by someone who understood what they were looking at," she said, without particular pride. "Does it bother you," he said, that is how the record describes you?" She thought about it honestly. "What bothers me," she said, "is that the record exists at all. I did what I did because it needed to be done, and because I was the person who could do it. I was not trying to become a file, but records are made by other people, and you do not get to choose what they write." Jin nodded. What happens now, he said, when the Empire looks at what happened on Voreth tonight and decides? They will pull my file, she said. The full one, not the summary, and someone at Imperial High Command will read it, and then they will read it again. And then they will have a very serious meeting about the cost-benefit analysis of pursuing the person responsible for what happened tonight versus the alternative. The alternative being deciding that Vareth IV and its surrounding colonies are a closed matter and moving their development interests elsewhere, she said. And you think they will choose that? I think they are a large bureaucratic empire that has been expanding for 200 years and has learned to recognize when a particular expansion creates a net loss, she said. Taking Varath children was efficient on paper. It costs them nothing and produces labor assets. But the response it generated tonight cost them a processing station's operational capacity, a communications blackout, 6 injured soldiers, and a praetor who is going to be writing an extremely uncomfortable report to his sector commander. The math no longer works in their favor. You are betting on them being rational, Jin said. I am betting on them being an empire, she said. Empires are not moral, but they are usually rational about cost. The same logic that made taking the children seem like a good idea will now make leaving us alone seem like a better one. Jin thought about this. And if you are wrong, he said. Mara looked at Eli on her right, at the hand gripping her sleeve. Then we will deal with what comes, she said, but I am not wrong. They returned the 10 colony children to Vareth IV first, a careful approach, no flags, Yava setting them down on the colony's outer landing strip at dawn, with Jin accompanying the children to the colony center to ensure they reached their families. The reunions happened in the gray-pink light of early morning, and they were loud and messy and complete, the kind of joy that does not organize itself neatly, but fills a space entirely. Then the Pale Run set down near Mara's farm. Eli was out of the ship before the landing struts fully settled. He ran to the farmhouse and went inside and came back out carrying his hand reader, which he had apparently been worried about, and then stood in the field looking at the rows of grain with the expression of someone checking that the world had remained where he left it. Sierra walked out beside her mother and looked at the field and the stone house, and the sky coming up over the ridge to the east. Is it over? Sierra said. Yes, Mara said. Sierra looked at her. You were never just a farmer, Sierra said. It was not a question. It had not been a question for a while. Mara suspected. Sierra was her daughter, and her daughter was not a child who missed things. I was a farmer, Mara said. I was also other things before that. The farm was always real. The other things, Sierra said, were they? They were necessary, Mara said, and they are done. Sierra considered this with the seriousness she gave everything. Okay, she said. She went inside to make breakfast. 3 weeks later, a Concordat administrative vessel appeared briefly at the edge of the Varath system. It sat at the boundary for approximately 4 hours, did not enter, sent no hails, and then left on a heading away from the colony. The colony elder tracked it on his personal scanner and watched it go. The Imperial census drones did not come back. The Concordat officials who had been processing paperwork in the colony market were gone. Their office was empty, their documentation stamps left behind on the desk, as if they had simply stood up and walked out without bothering to finish. Nobody said anything officially about any of this. Mara was in the field when old Henris came by with 2 of his sheep that had wandered through her fence. He came to tell her, and stayed for a few minutes the way neighbors do, talking about the weather and the crop yield, and the fact that the Concordat had apparently withdrawn its administration office without explanation. Strange business, Henris said. Mara said. Heard they pulled back from 3 other colonies in the region too, he said. Just gone, no notice, no explanation. Some people are saying the Empire decided the whole border region wasn't worth the administrative cost. That could be it, Mara said. Henris looked at her. He was a very old man who had lived on many worlds and watched many things happen, and had developed the particular instinct of old men who pay attention, which is the ability to sense when a simple answer is covering a longer story. He looked at Mara for a moment, and then he looked at the field, and then he looked at the farmhouse where he could hear Eli and Sira arguing inside through the open window. You know, he said, a traveler came through the market yesterday, a trader from the Orel Junction. He was asking about you, asked who the quiet woman on the edge of town was. What did you tell him? Mara said. I told him you were a farmer, Henris said. He paused. Mostly, he said. He gathered his sheep and walked back toward his own field. Myra watched him go. Then she turned back to her rows and kept working, moving through the grain with her blade in her hand and her eyes in their slow, steady sweep. The same woman who had lived here for 7 years, the same pace, the same quiet, the sky wide and pale above her and the ground red and solid beneath her feet. In the farmhouse, Sira was laughing at something Eli had said. It was a good sound. Mara kept working. The field needed the rest of the morning, and she intended to give it.